Welcome to Stories We Love. Stories We Love is about stories we love. And on this show, we get to interview really cool people who are doing wonderful things for the world. And I love everybody I'm getting to interview. It's so fun. And this show is meant to make you feel good, make your heart open, make your mind feel inspired, give you new ideas, different things that you can do if you want to make the world even more fun. And my name is Karen Laurie. I'm your hostess. And today we get to interview an old friend of mine named Barnaby Spring. Barnaby Spring works for the New York City school districts and works with them. And he is overseeing some really cool stuff for the kids. So, Barnaby Spring, tell us about yoga and mindfulness for the kids in New York.
Well, hello, Karen, and hello to the audience and to your friends and to your people who come. I'm Barnaby Spring. So it's the New York City Department of Education. And I think that's about 40 school districts, something 40, 44, 5 boroughs. And what's happening is that yoga and mindfulness is emerging as a formal structure in the New York City Department of Education. This is a story of something that began to happen 40, 50 years ago when teachers who were teaching students in New York City were realizing that they needed to find some practices to sustain themselves as people who live in New York City. So they were going to yoga studios or meditation studios, but really the yoga. And teachers realized one by one, almost, teachers who would discover these practices would share them with their students and, begin to speak to the families. And then teachers would go by that one teacher's classroom who didn't seem to be reacting to students in the same way that everybody else was. What are you doing? And so this informal emergence began that long ago. And in 2000, I started in the 90s as a teacher in the New York City Department of Education, and I was practicing yoga. And I began teaching students and realized that in different silos and pockets throughout this gigantic, the largest education public school system in the world. Wow. So you cannot know what's happening in your own system. And we began to realize that there were all kinds of people bringing these practices to students. And so at the time, I was working with Cheryl Watson Harris, who was the first deputy chancellor and really sort of in charge of developing school leadership and the schools. And she just said, we've got to formalize it. You're going to be in charge of it. She called me in, said, this is Barnaby. He's spearheading the work around developing this work. And we were off to the races. And so what's happening just as we speak, and then I'll be quiet. I'm sure you have some questions. We started for the first time in the history of this country, an in-house yoga and mindfulness teacher training program. Now, Karen, I don't know if you're familiar with the yoga teacher training programs. They're not cheap. You pay a few thousand, maybe not as expensive as they used to be, but that's a question of equity, and teachers don't necessarily have that kind of money to drop on a yoga teacher training. So this is free to teachers in the New York City Department of Education. And, I haven't had to talk about it in a while, and it's been intense, especially now because they want to scale this up. Our current chancellor, David Banks, and our current mayor, Eric Adams, one thing that nobody's having a debate about in New York City or in this country is that our children and our teachers who work with children need strategies to manage their stress and need strategies to be in their bodies when they're feeling stressed so that they don't act out. And we could even pause and just let that land. What does that mean today? And so we have graduated our third cohort of teachers throughout the city who are bringing these strategies, not just to our pre-K kids in elementary schools, all the way up to 12th grade, but to teachers, to parent coordinators, to managers, to superintendents, to executive superintendent. I mean, everybody's beginning to understand something very simple, that this is about developing the capacity to be aware of your thoughts and your feelings, to accept your thoughts and your feelings, and to know that you are not your thoughts and feelings. And so you therefore don't have to act out on them. You can talk about them. You can investigate them. And then you can integrate your thoughts and your feelings with your physical sensations in your body. And I don't know what else to say. It's all the research, the scientific-based research, the qualitative reports from families. It's not a miracle cure, Karen. I don't want to make it sound like that. But at this time in our country, at this critical sort of like crucible moment of truth, around how are we going to think, speak, and do in regards to children in our public school systems. And I'll tell you, people are calling us up saying, I want the mindfulness training. I want a physical, body-based, social, emotional learning experience for my students. That's the yoga. And it's secular. It can be introduced in a secular, non-sectarian way. And I'm just grateful. That's what's happening. In the midst of a lot of pain and sorrow, we've got this gem, and we're supporting the rest of the country. We are reaching out to and helping people figure out how to do this. And it's people like you, by the way, who reach out and ask to hear about this. You have no idea the service that you're providing by doing this. So I'm very grateful for that.
Ah, you're so sweet. Well, it's my pleasure, because kids are so important. Kids are our next generation, and you're making me cry. The whole thing you were saying about teachers needing strategies and being in their bodies and being able to handle stress and being able to teach that to kids, and then expanding it through the country as much as you can. I mean, it's just beautiful. And for kids to have a way, especially in New York City, I lived there for 4 years when you were there. And, for kids to have a way to process things, to relate to each other. A lot of times when you have a yoga class, my mom took me to yoga when I was 4, and I've been basically going ever since until about COVID quarantining. And then I stopped and I found something I like that I do at home. But in yoga classes, you meet people and you bond, and especially if you're doing it all as a group, like in a class, you can create a deeper bond with each other, because you're in a different, most people get into a different space, the yoga bliss or the mindfulness clarity that allows you to really, and the deeper breathing and all of that good stuff. It's so important. And it probably helps with education too, because if they've had a way to express themselves through the yoga, to move, to maybe break a sweat, to be doing stuff that feels good in their body, and then they're learning the mindfulness, they have to be able to process information and understand things much better, and have better questions, and have better understanding and comprehension. Would you agree with that?
Everything that you're saying, we can now say, this is scientifically true. This is behaviorally true. See, people want to see data, Karen. It's like, at the end of the day, the decision makers and the power holders are saying, show me the numbers. Well, we know that when a student practices mindfulness, their capacity to handle stress increases. And we see that in school suspension rates going down, classroom incidents going down. We see facts, not wishful thinking. We see kids, when they're getting stressed, saying, I need to go to the mindfulness room. They don't need to run out of the school.
Yeah, they don't need to run out of the school. They don't need to retaliate. They don't need to bring an assault thing.
There you have it. Isn't that the elephant in the room? I'm sorry for interrupting, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and kids in so many places, it's so stressful. You've got to be there at a certain time. You got to come in from recess when you're having fun, and then you got to sit still for so long. So I just think this sounds so brilliant. Now, some people might not know what mindfulness is. I do a different practice called heartfulness. I'll share what that is, then you share what mindfulness is. Heartfulness is, for me, I teach my clients and people how to have your heart open and full of love. Then your mind gets more quiet. And that's what I call heartfulness, a heart full of love. So what is mindfulness in your experience and how you guys are teaching it?
Well, we have, and I have, and my colleagues, particularly Stephen Stroll and Dr. Beverly Logan, who are the co-directors of the Yoga Mindfulness Teacher Training Program. I want to be clear that I'm happy to represent a whole team of people and many leaders around this work. We have a responsibility to provide something that works for any child from any walk of life, any race, any creed, any disability or gift or whatever it is. We are public servants. So mindfulness for us, as articulated by John Kabat-Zinn and the incredible work that he did through mindfulness-based stress reduction, where he took a look at this on a university, medical center, health model basis, and developed this concept of paying attention on purpose in a particular way to what arises in the present moment without judging. Now, you can simplify that, paying attention without judging, but that was the original definition. And we join that or connect that with yoga. And it's funny, in the 90s, in public education, yoga was really the big thing. Nobody was talking about meditation or mindfulness. Yoga was the thing that was happening. But within yoga, you're teaching meditation, you're teaching mindfulness. But we wanted to come up with a concept that would make it very clear to people that this is not transcendental meditation where you get a mantra or a puja. This is a very kind of reality-based, staying in the present moment, noticing what your experience is, and then accepting it, and then maybe even sharing about it and having some sense of identification and compassion with the experiences of others. And I wanted to, you connected on something that was very important. You talked about how it puts you in a different space practicing yoga. Well, this is one of the things that helped us expand this work in the New York City Department of Education was we took superintendents and principals to the Kripalu Institute in the Berkshires to have a leadership resilience retreat. And on that retreat, we got them out of New York City. And these were scholarships, by the way. Kripalu found a way to give these to us free. So we could lift our folks up out of the insanity of daily life in New York City and put them in the Berkshires and give them time and space to investigate what happens, what kinds of conversations are possible, especially so-called difficult conversations are not so difficult to have when people have taken time to relax and to release some stress. Somehow they're able to be present for and stay with a difficult conversation.
Right. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No.
it seems like there's so much in this country, probably in the world, it seems like, where there's, one side thinks this and one side thinks that. And when they start to talk, it's an eruption of, frustration, anger, blah, 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 all that stuff. But if you have a sense of equanimity, if you know how to manage your breath, because breath is like I think, an inroad to the subconscious. So if you know how to manage your breath, which happens a lot of times in yoga, you have the capacity to stay calm or be aware if you're not, and then bring it back, bring back the breath, even when you're kind of being triggered, and then the triggers can lose their grip on you. It seems like it. That's what I've seen you know, because I've done yoga for so many years. I mean, I'm old, and I'm just kidding. I feel very young, but I mean, I've done yoga like off and on, like mostly on for most of my life, and so really, it's something that gives you a an equanimity or the capacity for the capacity to return to an equanimity if you don't know how to keep it all the time.
Beautiful. Well said. You have, and I'm sorry for interrupting too. It's hard to be quiet while you're speaking because you're saying great. It's just for people who work in a system where we don't necessarily get a chance to have conversations with people like you, to hear you. And by like you, I mean people who are, your activity is in a different space, in a different place. But the people who are coming to listen to what you are providing us with, Karen, it's wonderful that you're connecting us. And it's wonderful to hear you say that, because we sometimes we wonder, is anybody realizing that how critical this is right now? And so thank you for that. There was something that I wanted to say to you, that it's not that TM or transcendental meditation in and of itself is a bad thing. It's that we're a public institution in a government that still wants to be a democracy. We believe. And, you know, we've got to provide services that are public, and that there's nothing that leans towards any kind of confusion about religion, or a child coming home and mom and dad saying, what did you do today? Oh, we practiced meditation. And oh, what's that? And oh, we were given a secret thing to say. Well, tell me what it is. I can't tell you. It's a secret. See, that's a deal breaker.
Right.
That's a deal breaker. We want to be very public and transparent, and we invite the whole New York City community. So I do, for instance, a mindfulness class for parents every Tuesday and Thursday night. And so parents, we have Parent University. We're very transparent. We invite our parents and we say, you tell us, do you want this or not? And the parents are like, well, yes, you know.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love it. And it's great that you do it. Do you do it on Zoom or you do it in person?
Do it on Zoom. You can,
Smart.
Parent University, people come from all over the country. And of course, we have a core group of people who come. And this is the other thing, Karen, that you remind me of this, is you're able to develop community, a community of healing, where strangers from all walks of life are coming on. We say hello. We have this simple practice, and we invite, you know, graduates from the yoga mindfulness teacher training program, or we invite students. We've got students who've been practicing this and studying this, and we're even having conversations now about what would if a child can be a certified lifeguard, why can't a child be a certified yoga teacher under supervision? But why can't there be wellness pavilions in our city parks if we have city pools? And so we're going there. We're having those conversations. And, you know, there's only so much money, and everybody needs their champions, needs their thought partners, needs their connectors. And I have to say, I see you, and I think probably all of the guests that come on your program, Karen, do see you as a champion, as a thought partner, and as a connector. And I want to emphasize, I know we're here to talk about New York City, and that's great, but the real important thing that's happening right now is connection, and a possibility of somebody who's here, or who comes to hear you, realizing we're not out of the woods yet with yoga and mindfulness. It hasn't been fully embraced. It's still in the process of proving itself. Some people have a lot of understandings around it, and we need all the help we can get.
Right. You know, and it's foreign to so many people, and yet it's not. I want to share one story about the power of yoga with somebody I met one time. He was 84 when I met him. He was in World War II and his plane had been shot down. He was in the hospital for a year. They said he would never walk again. He had a nurse that believed in him. So the nurse, and this is in the 40s, the nurse, and I met him in the 90s, the nurse believed in him, and she gave him little exercises to do. By the time it was a year, he was able to walk out He had to go AWOL because they didn't think he could do it. So he walked out, and somehow he found a yoga class, and he became a yoga teacher, and his body completely healed. And when I met him, I was a gymnast. I was flying trapeze where I met him. And and where I met him, he had his feet. Now I can't do this. Even when I was training all the time, I couldn't do this. Between two chairs and his pelvis on the floor. So he was in an advanced, hyper split, right? More than 180. And he was doing back bends with his feet right here by his face. And he was 84 years old, and he had so much energy, and he was so flexible. And I just thought, you are my hero. And he said, it's yoga. It's yoga. It changed my life. It's yoga. So I just, you reminded me of that guy. He was such a cool guy. And so if you're doing yoga, if you're a child and you're doing yoga, or you want to do yoga, or you're a parent, or you're a teacher who wants to do yoga, it can only serve you, throughout your life if you keep, playing with it.
And the wonderful thing that I always believed is if you give licensed pedagogues who teach in public education in this country the time and space to investigate yoga and mindfulness with their vast experience of showing up for kids. I mean, I'm now going to cry about our incredible public servants in education.
Right.
I mean, and I'm not a guy who likes to cry, but I mean, it's overwhelming these days is that when these people get a chance to investigate, they know how to introduce these things in developmentally appropriate ways. They know how to teach mindfulness to a kindergartner. They are telling me stories, the kids and the teachers, of children who wake up in the middle of the night and are able to put themselves back to sleep, of children who have massive anxiety about tests. There's a lot of anxiety about tests. The World Health Organization invited me to speak as part of a thing they wanted to do about the spike of suicide. We know that these are strategies that help a child to become aware of what's happening inside of themselves so that they can manage it without causing harm to themselves or others. Now, who's got a problem with that? I understand. I grew up in Nebraska, grew up at Father Flanagan's Boys Town. I understand the Christian, conservative, Catholic. I get it. There is nothing to fear here, folks. This is about empowering human beings to not be afraid.
Right. And to learn skills. If a kindergartner can put themselves back to sleep, and if a high schooler can put themselves back to sleep or can be calm during a test, that's a life skill. That's a skill that will serve them. There's so many people that have problems with sleep. I used to have narcolepsy. I've healed it, but there's so many people that have problems with sleep. And, it's really challenging when you have a problem with sleep or when you have a problem with anxiety to just move forward in your life. You're too tired or you're too anxious, which is tiring, because I used to have that too. So I love what you're teaching. I love it so much. And how many people are in your team that is providing this to the school district?
Well, we are literally in the midst of knowing how many that will be because we have new leadership. I have to shout out Mayor Eric Adams. When he was the borough president of Brooklyn, I chased him down. I used to follow him at where he was speaking and say, what do you want to do about mindfulness? And he said, I'm ready to go. And he was. So with his championing us, and also Richard Carranza, who was the chancellor of the New York City Department of Education when we really started digging into this formally, and then Misha Porter, who was briefly the chancellor after Richard Carranza, and now David Banks, they believe in this work. So they're in the process of trying to figure out, based upon decisions that have to be made on the state level around budget and mayoral control, what is possible. Because look, we also have to be about mindfulness in education. And we have to know that there are some major issues that need to be addressed before we can talk about mindfulness and yoga. So that's a little humility for all of us who are so absolutely certain that mindfulness and yoga has a role to play. It does, but we need to be mindful. So I think that hopefully we'll have a core group of 10 to 15 people who citywide will manage an increasing into the hundreds of parent coordinators, social workers, principals who are not only certified yoga and mindfulness teachers, but also want to deepen schools that are rooted in a culture of mindfulness. What do I mean by that? Well, one of the things that's happening is that some schools no longer have a dean of students, which was a punitive. Did you ever have to go see the dean of students when you were in high school, Karen? I know I did a couple.
I think I did. I think I did. I walked barefoot a lot. I didn't know that I had a problem with shoes being too tight.
There
And so
you
I
go.
walked barefoot. Actually got suspended for a couple of days because of being barefoot. When barefoot's so healthy, especially on grass. But anyway, which
Well,
is
see, there's something there. Mindfulness also helps you to examine your rigid thinking and to think outside of the box and be more innovative in solving problems. Another big thing that's needed. But we now have deans of mindfulness and restorative practices.
oh my God.
Instead of a dean of students, it's the dean of mindfulness. And there's not a detention room in some schools. In some schools, there's a mindfulness room. And so if any student at any time is feeling stressed or feeling like they might be saying something or doing something, now this is the thing. In the past, what happens? A kid will walk out of the school because they know they're not in a safe place in their body. So they want to protect people. They're protecting people by getting out of the school. So now they have a space where they can say, stay in school, don't miss the rest of the day and miss the credits and flunk the class and not graduate. Stay. We're a public service. Stay. What's the thinking? What's the feeling? Let's stay with it. Let's sit with it. Let's breathe. Let's practice some yoga. And then it passes. And the student has a deep sense of confidence in themselves. I start crying again.
Yeah, me too.
A child has a deep sense of courage, not courage in the sense of I need to get a gun and shoot it, but courage in the sense of whatever I'm feeling, I don't need to be afraid of it. I can notice it. I can appreciate it. I can identify with that feeling in another human being. And we can find a better way to experience this. And that's what's happening as a result of mindfulness and yoga in our schools in the New York City Department of Education. And it's not just a social emotional learning skill. Our kids experience anxiety and doubt when they're in the midst of a math problem or writing an essay or solving a complicated robotics equation. They begin to experience that same sense of fear or anxiety, and they don't have to be afraid. They get to sit and practice mindfulness, and then they wait, and then that answer starts talking to them, and they put that answer down, and they realize, wow. And they get excited about putting their attention on something that they can choose to put their attention on.
Yeah.
And really, that's what we're doing. In many ways, we're training students how to be in complete ownership of their own attentional focus.
Yeah.
So they're moving from the amygdala of fight and flight, and they're moving into the prefrontal cortex. And now it's not a miracle cure, but some of this is just common sense. But, you know, I do trainings. And one time I was doing a training, and one person, this was the SAPS counselors, Substance and Abuse Prevention Intervention Services. And one SAPS counselor on one side of the room said, "But Barnaby, isn't this just common sense?" And another SAPS counselor stood up and said, "But that's just it. Common sense is not common anymore."
Oh, wow. Barnaby, first of all, I hear your passion, and I hear how much you love these kids, and I hear how much you love these teachers and supers, and administrators and the whole district, it's just,
Yeah, I have to practice a lot of mindfulness to keep that in check.
it's not, you don't need to keep it in check, babe. It's so beautiful. And it's making me cry though. But when I was a kid, there was a kid who he used to light matches on me when I went to school. And when he was in third grade, he got in trouble because he set the school on fire. They took him off in a police car. He's now in jail, not from that, but from something worse. He's been in jail since he's got out of high school, basically, on death row. And if you can interrupt that pattern with a mindfulness room, with someone who cares. That kid needed someone who listened. That kid needed someone who could understand whatever the stress was that he was under, and then be able to help him understand it and not be afraid of his feelings. Like when you say that, most people are afraid of their feelings. And when you can get comfortable to know, hey, I can feel anything. And the reason someone doesn't do something is almost always because they have fear of something that they're wanting. They have some fear, and so they think, I can't do it. But if they can get comfortable with their fear, if they can get comfortable with it and then know how to shift it or how to breathe through it, you're right, the answers come. And then they know, oh, I know what to do. I know what the next step is. So this is something that you're teaching that is a life skill that the New York City is teaching. I'm so thankful to all the people you've mentioned, that the whole school district is teaching, and that the teachers, nobody goes into teaching for the money. They go into it because they care about kids. Both my parents were teachers. My cousin's a teacher. My aunt was a teacher. I mean, it's just one of the most honorable, loving jobs someone can do. And it's something that teachers need to be appreciated, because they're in a room with more kids than any parent has, unless they're running a home or something. But for the most part, teachers are with more kids than a mom with 8 kids, right? So there was so many children, and yet they're able often to handle it. And when they're using these skills, I just can imagine like the blossoming that's going to happen in the relationships, in the learning, in the understanding, in the capacity to really grasp things, because they're able to be calm. So thank you to the teachers, to the admins, to the New York City School District for bringing this in. I hope you can formalize it. I hope it can be something formalized in a loving, easy,
Well,
strict way.
when I'm in the middle of a dream and I'm fantasizing, the solution is somebody calling up the Fund for Public Schools and saying, I don't want this to be messed with, no matter who's in charge of the city or who's in charge of the DOE. I want to support this through the Fund for Public Schools. So there's a plug for that. But can I tell you a closing story? I didn't want to tell it. I thought of it and I thought, I don't want to tell it. I think I want to tell you because I hope you'll let me do this. We have a high school student. This happened a couple years ago. She'd been practicing mindfulness. She told this story publicly herself when she had to talk about what mindfulness means to her. She was in a park in a volatile part of New York City. And a man was mindless. He'd lost his mind. He was acting out in fear. He had a gun. Police were after him. He grabbed this girl and had the gun and was going to shoot her. And the police weren't there. She was there. The man let her go. The police came. She was able to describe the man to the T. When asked, how were you able to do that? She said, I didn't get afraid. I was mindful. I kept breathing and I noticed the man. I noticed the rhythm of his voice. I noticed his face. I had a sense of who he was. And so when she was asked to describe his facial, she was able to describe a lot. That's courage. That's fearlessness. That girl had something that I think a lot of people in this world might be wanting to start having a talk about. She knew on the spot. She didn't have to have any authority figure tell her what to do. And I wanted to tell you that. And also, this is not a rollout, this is not a mandate. We're not telling people they have to learn mindfulness. We're not telling teachers they have to teach it or we're going to fire them. That would be mindless.
Right.
So I'm sorry if I spoke too long, but your tribute to the teachers is incredibly moving. And there is such a thing as vicarious trauma. And so studies show, and there was a study done with New York City teachers, that when teachers were just practicing mindfulness for themselves, the quality of instruction went up.
Of course.
Their resilience, they came to work more often too.
Right. Because what makes people sick? Stress. It's one of the biggest causes that makes people sick. Stress is inflammatory, inflammation. When you're in stress, and when kids are in stress, so what you're doing, you're helping prevent future wars, because when kids are in stress, their blood flow goes to the arms and legs, fight or flight, or freeze. And when kids learn how to manage it, when kids learn strategies so that they can breathe, so that they can move their body in a way that feels good, so that they can do different things, and they mitigate the stress, now their bellies are funded, their heart is funded, their lungs are funded. The parts of them, we have a brain in our head, but we have a brain in our heart, we have a brain in our belly, we have a brain in our fascia, we have a brain in our skin. And when people grow up with the fight or flight or freeze thing, most of the time they get those big bulky muscles because they're afraid and they're in that place where they want to. So a lot of times you see people that are super huge, and the people that are ready to fight, it's because they've grown up with stress. And what you're doing is you're shifting it. And I also want to shout out to that beautiful girl. I am so proud of her. And I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
Because that's not something that even most adults could do. That's something that needs to be understood and learned how to do. I have that capacity. I've had it many, many times, but I love that she can do it, and that's going to serve her forever. And if she can maintain that understanding of how she did it, how she stayed calm.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I just, bravo to you, bravo to the teachers, bravo to the kids who are trying it, bravo to the kids that say, I'm stressed, I need to go to the stress reduction room, or what did you call it?
The mindfulness room.
Mindfulness room, right. I need to go to the mindfulness room. Like most people don't even know they're stressed. That's how disconnected people can be. So they don't know they're stressed, so they don't know that they're acting out. And you can act out in ways that only hurt yourself by eating a bunch of ding dongs, or you can act out, do they even make those anymore? Or you can act out, in a violent way. But when you learn how to do these strategies, which I'm so thankful you're doing this, especially in New York. I mean, every city needs it, but in New York, there's just such a great mix, a diversity of people, a diversity of culture, a diversity of thought, a diversity of countries that people come from, which is one of the things I love the most about New York, and that's represented in the schools. And so this is something that's unifying, and it's not the way you're doing it, where it's more basic and not got any religion to it. It's so smart, and it's so connecting, and it also allows something that I think every child needs, which is to feel like they belong, like they're important. And when you're doing this and you're teaching them, and the teachers are treating them with more dignity because they're in more relaxation, kids feel like they belong. And then there's not that other aspect that comes out that can be so damaging.
Would you like to be interviewed for a job as an employee in the New York City Department? Are you looking for a job? I mean, I have to think strategically. Part of my work is also developing leadership, and it sounds like maybe you should be doing something, um, in New York City, whatever we do has to speak to a diversity of people. It has to be inclusionary. It can't be. So we have culturally responsive mindfulness. We have teachers who will say things like, well, what about decolonizing mindfulness? And we're like, show us. these teachers are brilliant people. They've been thinking about things and how to solve problems. We have people doing innovative work throughout the whole New York City Department of Education. And the yoga and mindfulness actually, like you said, it creates a space for them to start thinking mindfully about solving other things.
Right. Right. If we can get it now, we can do it into the government.
There's one senator who's written a book about it.
Oh, who's that?
I don't want to get the wrong person, but it's out there. He'll probably be your next guest.
I love it. I love it. I have this desire to teach teachers and to teach children, how to be in a state of love. Yeah. So if I can, I'd volunteer. I wouldn't want to take a job because I like what I'm doing, but I would volunteer. And I also want to say, if there's a teacher who wants, or an administrator, or anybody who's watching this who wants my books, they all basically help you be more, in my case, heartful, but it's similar to what you're talking about, not religious. It's cosmological in that sense. But you can go to chronicpleasurebook.com. And then Barnaby, let's I just want to say thank you to the DOE in New York City. My dad worked at the Los Angeles Unified School District, so I know like the stress that they were all under at times, and how much fun they also had. So I hope you guys are having more fun and less stress, and that you guys can employ the mindfulness and the yoga as well. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we say au revoir?
I just need to acknowledge what the children are telling us about mindfulness and yoga. The children, the youth, they investigate these strategies and they begin to adapt and apply them in ways that give me incredible hope and make me realize everything's going to be okay. I know that we're really, really in a turbulent place, but I'm betting my money on the kids.
Yeah.
And kids, when they get this mindfulness, they have their own sense and they use it to connect. They use it to increase their capacity to tolerate. And certainly heartfulness is used often in our yoga and mindfulness classes in the DOE. Compassion is not a bad word in the New York City. Wisdom is not empathy is something that everybody's screaming about. But yoga and mindfulness teaches without instructing. It's a practice that when a student has an embodied experience, the inherent intelligence within that child begins to kick in. The inherent goodness. Yes. They're not inherently bad. Right. Not one of them.
No one in the world is inherently bad.
This is a practice that cultivates what's there that is meant to be there.
Right.
So that's all I have. And just major love and gratitude to you. What an incredible path you're on, my friend. Woo!
Thank you, Barnaby. It's so good to reconnect. And just back to what you were just saying, those strategies that the kids are learning, how the ideas will come to them if they keep them up. They don't have to necessarily do the same thing, but if they can incorporate that mindfulness, if they can incorporate that understanding that their feelings are nothing to be afraid of. Feelings are just feelings, and they're not anything to be afraid of. And good feelings feel really good, and you can maintain those more and more and more. And just the capacity for these kids, I love children so much, and just the capacity for these children to be able to have these skills as they go through life. They're going to be winners, every single one of them. And they already are, just the ones that are participating. And the teachers, you're such winners for investigating a new way of being, for learning how to be a community, for learning how to communicate in a different way, for being able to recognize when you're upset and do something about it. There's so many things that are making all of these kids successful right now that is going to serve them for the rest of their life and serve everyone they're around.
And get engaged with your public school. Public means public. We don't have an endowment fund. The parents, citizens like you, engaged people like you, you're what make the system work. Public education is not invulnerable. In fact, it's extremely vulnerable to the interests of people who aren't necessarily sharing the interests of the children on this planet.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good point. I love that about that's something I can do. It's something anybody who's watching that has an interest in children and has good ideas that are healing and fun and helpful and engaging for children or for the education. It's fantastic. Barnaby Spring, I love you. I love what you're doing. I love what the DOE in New York City is doing. I love that you're sharing it with other school districts. How do people reach you guys if they're in another district or they're a school in New York that wants to learn it?
You
How do
know,
they do?
there's a national organization called the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. There's Mindful Schools. These are national, but in New York City, we have the Yoga Mindfulness Teacher Preparation Program website. You can go to ymtpp.org and you can begin to learn the story. Part of it is that you can help us, like you're helping us today, Karen, tell the story about the good things that are happening. It's not just happening in New York City. There's yoga and mindfulness teachers all over this country bringing this into public education.
Yes.
And when we make it something that they can afford to do, we're making sure that it gets to some of the kids and the teachers who need it the most.
Yes. Yes. Because it really is. So many kids that have more money are exposed to things like yoga and mindfulness. And it's so important to get it to everyone. Everyone, everyone, everyone. Everyone is valuable. Everyone belongs. Everyone's important.
Mm.
Thank you, Barnaby Spring.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody who's tuned into Stories We Love. If you want more Stories We Love, you can go to storiesweloveshow.com. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.